Hello everyone, FPL Raptor here and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. In today's video I have my Game Week 20 deadline decisions. This is a weekly series where I take you through your final questions and dilemmas ahead of the upcoming deadline. If you are enjoying the content here on this channel and you get any use out of today's video, please do smash that like button and make sure to subscribe as well. But without further ado, let's jump into it. So the first thing to discuss is the updates from the press conferences today that are directly relevant to some of the key players that we own in FPL. This isn't everything, but this is some of the key information. I'll actually discuss the Man City updates in a separate section in the next section, just because I think it's relevant also to whether we end up picking up Foden and or Alvarez for our FPL teams, and some of my opinions around Erling Haaland, KDB and Doku. So I'll discuss all of that in the next section. But here, the first thing of note is Lascelles' injury is not serious and Eddie Howe thinks he'll be back very soon. The key issue, though, is Newcastle aren't defending very well. The next three fixtures are very poor. And Lascelles probably isn't, in fact, he isn't, in Newcastle's best starting 11. That back four, I think, is pretty obvious now on paper. It is Trippier, Schär, Botman, and Burn. Maybe Livramento in some games, given how much Burn struggled recently against Alanga. But Lascelles isn't, in my opinion, when Schär and Botman are both fit, going to get into that starting 11. And therefore, I think he's a decent sell regardless. Of course, you could just tuck him away, third sub, if you have other defenders. But for me, I don't think the injury is the thing that would make me want to sell him. I think it's just that he doesn't get into the team. The thing you could say is, well, both Schär and Botman have suffered with injuries recently. Maybe you just keep Lascelles third sub. And if either of them get injured, he probably comes straight back in the 11. So don't feel like you've got to force him out. But I think he's a pretty easy sell just based on the fact that he's not in the current starting 11 for them. The other information, which is relevant now no longer to Simicast, but maybe Gomez, is that Robertson is not even close to team training, was the quote from Klopp today. So it could be that Liverpool go out and try and get a left-back in the January transfer market, or it could just be that Gomez gets a hell of a lot of football at left-back. And therefore, if you're looking for a cheap defender, and that looks to be the case, I don't hate it, but of course, he doesn't carry much, if any, attacking threat, despite taking a few more shots recently. Everton news, Tarkowski actually missed training along with Calvert-Lewin on Thursday with a knock. I don't think a knock will keep Tarkowski out, in my opinion. He's the sort of player that you can imagine playing through pretty much anything, but it's something to bear in mind. That will make the Everton defence in general a lot weaker, and also I know a few people do have Tarkowski in their team, so just note that he did miss training on Thursday. Very, very key piece of information and interesting. Moyes does not currently know whether Kudus will play in Game Week 20 because West Ham actually play in January, not December, which I think is after the threshold or deadline for when a lot of players go off to their teams with for AFCON and the Asian Cup. Moyes doesn't actually know whether Kudus will play, and that's obviously not ideal if you own him and we're planning on giving him one more game. I would basically wait until the last minute and hope that we get either embargoed information this evening or information before the Saturday deadline as to whether Kudus will be available. Maybe you don't want to risk it though, or maybe you just make sure that you have a decent first sub. But unfortunately, for some reason, David Moyes didn't know whether his player would be available against Brighton. On Willian, who I know a few people have still managed to hold on to just due to having other issues in their team, unfortunately, once again, he's a doubt. And I think at this stage, given the fact that Fulham have also dropped off in recent weeks, Willian is probably a sell unless we get any other information. Interestingly, and I didn't expect this, Hwang Hee-chan is apparently available along with Dawson for Game Week 20. He has been in full team training on Thursday. So Hwang, if you want to give him one more week, you could do. And he's performed so well. He got a brace in the first half in Game Week 19. And in all honesty, if he was still on the pitch, he probably would have got more. So if you want to give Hwang one more week, I certainly don't mind it. And it might allow you to focus your transfers elsewhere. Do bear in mind, though, that Hwang then goes off to the Asian Cup from Game Week 21 onwards. The final information was around the Aston Villa defenders. Sadly for me, and I'll discuss my team in the final section. If you want to know what I'm doing this week, I'm pretty set what I think I'm going to do. I'll discuss that in the final section. Pau Torres is not fully fit. Despite being in full training all week, which I find very strange, and it makes me think maybe he is, Emery seemed to suggest that he's not available to start or that he's very unlikely. So, unfortunately, it doesn't look like we can rely on Pau Torres for Game Week 20. And Luca Dean's injury, good for him, by the way, is only 20 to 25 days. We actually thought it was going to be a lot more severe based on the way that he hobbled off the pitch. And a lot of people started to talk about Alex Moreno coming in. Unfortunately, I don't think you can bring in Moreno now because since Moreno's come back, we expected him to go straight back into the 11. It looks like Luca Dean could still be first choice, or at least enough competition to not want to go there. And the issue with saying 20 to 25 days, usually that would be like 5 game weeks. But given the way that the fixtures are spread out in January, there is only 2 deadlines in January. They're all spread out by 2 weeks. That's actually only 2 game weeks that you'd have Alex Moreno starting ahead of Luka Dean. So for that reason, I don't think you can go for either of the Aston Villa left backs. And the fact that Pau Torres still isn't available, I'd probably for now, unless you're bringing in like an Emi Martinez, just avoid the Aston Villa defence altogether. So those were the key press conference updates outside of Manchester City. Let me know if I missed anything down below. Let's now move on to discussing Erling Haaland, Phil Foden and Julian Alvarez. So guys, recently you've heard me talk about One Future Foot, which is the world's first global virtual football league. And within that, they have a really good fantasy game that I've been playing now for over 2.5 months, winning weekly prizes of money, kits. And actually, I'm doing a giveaway in this video. 5 people that sign up to One Future Football, which is completely free to sign up to, 5 people will be given a 5-player pack, which is worth a little bit of money, and it will allow you to enter the pro version of the fantasy game because you need to own 5 cards in order to enter the pro game. So 5 of you, all you have to do, sign up using my link, you'll be entered into a giveaway, and then the week after that, 5 of you will win a 5-player pack, which, like I said, will allow you to enter the pro game. For now, though, the deadline is this evening, Friday evening at 9 PM UK time. You can go ahead and enter the One Future Football Fantasy free game in which you don't need to own any cards. So I thought I would just show you my free team for this week, and I've gone very, very different with quite a few of the players, but the team that I am tipping to do well in round 16 is actually Manhattan, which is why I've captained Luka Johnson, who is a little bit of a differential captaincy in One Future Football, but I fancy going a little bit different this week. That is my one tip to you. I think Manhattan will do fairly well this week. So do sign up using the link down below in the description. Like I said, 5 of you that sign up will win a 5-player pack, but even if you don't win that, it's a really, really enjoyable project that I'm getting involved with One Future Football. There is much more than just the fancy game. You can also train the players, which allows you to have a direct impact over how the teams perform. You can own sort of shares within the club as well. You can buy kits, you can get player packs. There are so many different facets to this game. I've been absolutely loving it, but I wanted to give back to some of you that also sign up to the game. And like I said, there'll be a giveaway for 5 of you to earn 5-player packs. So what is the latest update on Haaland, KDB and Doku? Because all 3 of them haven't been pictured in full team training for a while now. And unfortunately, it looks like that will continue for Manchester City. So the update we got 2 days ago from Guardiola on the 27th of December. On Erling Haaland, he said he's still not with the team. He feels better, but he hasn't made one training session with us. Hopefully in January, he can come back with us. Now, as I said, the Game Week 20 deadline is obviously the 30th of December. The Game Week 21 deadline is the 13th, and then the Game Week 22 deadline is the 30th. So we actually have a 2-week break between 20 and 21, and then a 2-week break between 21 and 22. So just because he says back in January doesn't mean we've got game weeks and game weeks without Haaland. It could well be that he's back for Game Week 21, but that immediately tells us, if it's January, that he probably missed the Sheffield United game, and that was confirmed in the press conference today by Pep Guardiola, that Kevin De Bruyne, Erling Haaland, Jeremy Doku, and also the newly injured John Stones will all be unavailable for the Sheffield United match on Saturday. So we have the confirmation now that there'll be no Haaland and, importantly, no KDB as well for Game Week 20, which, of course, makes both Alvarez and Foden very, very, very likely to start because they just don't have the players, really, to bench either of them, in my opinion, anyway. If they do and they risk the possibility of losing, it's just not going to be a good look for Man City. So despite it being what you would imagine is a relatively easy game on paper, I think they have to start a relatively strong team because I just don't think Pep's in a position to start suddenly rotating some of their key players. So good news for Foden and Alvarez. And then the next section, I will discuss Foden and Alvarez in a little bit more detail. But what does this mean for Haaland? I don't know. And I have a feeling we could be sat here in Game Week 21 and Haaland might not still be back. And it could even be the case for Game Week 22. And of course, in Game Week 21, we then have no Son and no Salah. They go off to their respective tournaments. And we can sell them anyway to bring Haaland back in. So if you're in a position right now where you're sat there with money in the bank because you have decided not to spread it because you kept it for Haaland, maybe now is the time to just go and spend it. I know you've held it this long and maybe you're thinking, well, he could be back for 21, but we have no guarantees even back in January. He said, hopefully in January. It could be February, and in which case we're looking more towards Game Week 23, 24. So for me, the fact that we've not got a single positive update really on Haaland and that he's not been in team training at all, I'd feel comfortable just either removing him from your team or spending the money that you have available. And listen, if he's back sooner than we think and he is back for 21, and you have to take a -4 hit, you have to take a -4 hit. You know, it's not the end of the world having to take a single hit every now and again. And I think just keeping a £14 million asset sat there in the hope that Pep Guardiola isn't lying and that he is available soon It just doesn't seem the best use for me. It is interesting that Kevin De Bruyne has been in full training for a while now. I think about 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks. But as you can see here, he did suffer from a little bit of fatigue because he hasn't played for a very long time. And the impression that we get from De Bruyne is that he is training to the highest level possible to put him into a position where once he goes back into a game, he just doesn't pick up an injury straight away. So it may well be that De Bruyne continues to train with the team for a while and isn't rushed back in. I think both Haaland and KDB, when they're even fully fit and available, are going to be slowly eased back in because they really can't afford big injuries to either Haaland or KDB beyond what they've already had. So my opinion is we aren't going to see, obviously, KDB and Haaland for 20. I wouldn't be surprised if we don't see either for 21. I do think at least one of them will be back for 22, which is the end of January. And I therefore think that Alvarez, as we'll discuss in a second, might have his minutes limited soon, but I think you'll probably get, or you will get 20, you'll probably get 21, and you may well get away with 22 as well. But beyond that, I'd be surprised if one of, if not both, Haaland and De Bruyne are back then. So that's the update that we have. Let's now move on to the next section, which is discussing Foden versus Alvarez, and if you should bring either in. So in these deadline decisions videos, I'm usually not as stats heavy. I usually just give my thoughts and opinions, and it's a little bit more quick fire and just general opinion based stuff. But I thought with Alvarez and Foden, because so many people are asking about them, and it is a very difficult decision if you're looking to bring one in, I thought it was worth just having some stats on the screen and discussing the stats in a little bit more detail, because it is relevant to decide who we bring in. Who is the one that is getting the most chances in the team? I should just caveat before I even start discussing them, I have two biases here. The first bias I have is that I already own Alvarez. So it might be easy, and I'm not saying this is my opinion, by the way, but it may well be easy for me to sit here and say, don't bother with Alvarez, he's not been performing, whilst I'm sat there with him in my team. So there is the bias there. The second bias is that I absolutely love Phil Foden. He is one of my favourite players genuinely of all time to watch in the Premier League. I think he's in the top 5 most gifted footballers in the world. I think that highly of him, and I love owning him in FPL. So take into account those two biases as I talk about the players. The first thing to discuss is around pricing. They are both priced very reasonably and very similarly as well. For the amount of minutes that they're getting at the moment in a Man City attack, I don't think they are poorly priced, and I don't think there's a big enough gap between them to say, definitely go for Alvarez because he's so much cheaper. Yes, he is a bit cheaper, and you should maybe take that into account, but I don't think there's enough of a difference. The key difference for them, however, is the position that they play, of course. Not in the Man City team, but in FPL. Phil Foden is a midfielder, and Alvarez is a forward. And therefore, it may just be as simple as saying, I only have a midfield slot, I'll go for Foden, or I have a forward slot, I've got Darwin, don't really want him, I'll move to Alvarez. And it may be as simple as that, but for some people, maybe you do have a Darwin in your attack, or a Solanke that you don't mind selling, but you've also got like a Hwang or a Gordon in midfield, and it's like, I could go either way. And I think for those people, the decision is a lot trickier. Because generally the midfielders have been the most valuable spots in our team this year, but the forwards recently have also been very good. And I would argue we're almost trending towards a 3-4-3 formation, or even like a 3-5-3, where you've got a rotating 8th attacker, but there are lots of good forwards at the moment. So Alvarez has taken up a very, very valuable forward spot. You've got Solanke, Haaland once he's back. Darwin looks like he's finding his feet. Watkins has been super consistent. João Pedro is starting to look good as well. And maybe you just still do prefer a 3-5-2. So the position, of course, is very important in your team. The reason that we are so interested in Man City assets are the fixtures, right? Over the next 5, they have absolutely excellent fixtures. Sheffield United and Burnley at home in the next 3. Newcastle have struggled defensively recently. So whilst that on paper is a difficult fixture, it could be that City get goals. Brentford have been leaking goals. They conceded 4 to Wolves. So that's a pretty decent fixture. And Everton at home, Everton have been decent recently, but I still expect Man City to score. On top of that, across the next 6 weeks, we are expecting Man City to have a double game week. We originally thought that was most likely for Game Week 21, but that now looks like it will be Game Week 25 is the most likely, but it could be at any point, I suppose, as long as there is a free midweek. So let's say that they do get that double in 25. Across the next 6 weeks, you've got brilliant fixtures and a double game week. It makes sense to look to bring in some Man City assets, whether that be attackers or defenders. So putting that all together, let's now move on to the discussion between Alvarez and Foden. Before we look at the data, I want to discuss the roles that they're playing in the team and also minutes moving forward. So obviously, when Haaland was fit, both Alvarez and Foden were still starting, and they were both starting in more central midfield roles. We've seen Foden play out wide this season at points, but they both seem to be preferred in those, I would call it dual 8s. It might not be what you want to call it, but they're not really playing as a number 10. They're not playing behind the forward, but they're not playing deep. And they're not particularly playing wide. They're playing as dual eights, which means they support the attack, but they also defend a little bit as well. And they press from the front. And at all points, you get sort of one that's going slightly further forward than the other. Then obviously Haaland picks up the injury, and all of a sudden you're thinking, well, Alvarez is the number 9, right? Haaland's out. They don't have another striker. Alvarez sits in the number 9. Foden probably continues to play the role that he has been. However, that isn't the case, in my opinion, based on watching them recently. Yes, Haaland is out, but Alvarez's position and Foden's position doesn't seem to have changed an awful lot. They're both still kind of playing as dual eights. They've just included basically another midfielder, and that might have pushed Foden and Alvarez slightly further forward. But I guess what I'm saying is Alvarez is not playing as the out-and-out number 9 for Man City. He's not even really playing like a false 9 for large spells. Him and Foden are just rotating as to who is the furthest forward for Man City. So maybe, if anything, this has just boosted Foden's appeal slightly because he's gone slightly further forward. So from open play, I don't think Haaland being out from open play, again, I'm emphasising that, has made Alvarez a much better option. However, what it has done is it's put Alvarez on pens. And we saw that in Game Week 19. He took the penalty. It wasn't a great penalty, but he dispatched. And therefore, you would feel fairly comfortable saying that Alvarez is on penalties for Man City now. So what you have with Alvarez is a player that is on penalties, on all corners pretty much, some free kicks, and playing in an attacking role for Man City. The addition of penalties is massive. I've said it time and time again, penalty takers are king in FPL. And so even if his attacking threat from open play isn't massively boosted, the penalties is a massive advantage for Alvarez. So definitely, the one that has benefited the most from Haaland being out is Alvarez. But I just wanted to comment on the fact that he's not playing as an out-and-out number 9. Moving forward, I actually think that Foden's minutes are the most secure. And the reason I say that is once Haaland comes back, we have seen that that does not affect Alvarez and Foden's minutes, right? Once Haaland's back, they will still play in the midfield. However, we do have KDB coming back at some point soon, assuming that he can stay fit. And once KDB comes back, he will take one of those roles off of Alvarez and Foden. And it could be, and this could happen, we saw it at points before last season, that Alvarez and KDB play in midfield together and Foden just goes out to the left or out to the right. Yes, that then means that one of Doku, Grealish, Bernardo Silva miss out, but that could be the favoured 11 for Pep. But I think what is more likely is KDB starts to take minutes away from Alvarez, because I think, and Man City fans will probably agree, Alvarez has struggled at points this season in that midfield role. I don't think it suits him best. I think he is better further forward. And we even saw at points last season, he drifted out a little bit wide at points and he was quite effective too. So I think once KDB and Haaland are both back, I think that they will be obviously in Man City starting 11. And I think Alvarez will be pushed to the bench on some occasions. Not all the time, but I think his minutes will be reduced. The great thing about Phil Foden, as you can see by his touch map, is he is quite effective wide right. And I think Phil Foden is probably most likely to still stay in the team once KDB and Haaland are back. I think he'll be pushed out to the right. I think Bernardo Silva could come a little bit more central. And I think it'll be Doku or Grealish on the left. Again, lots of hypothesizing. Bernardo Silva has been great on the right. So maybe Foden doesn't get in on the right. But I just think, if we're talking about 6-7 game weeks away now, maybe even towards double game week 25, the most likely player for me to still be in the 11 then out of Foden and Alvarez is Foden. So I think I've discussed everything I want to discuss there. Let's now discuss the stats. And they are in favour of Julian Alvarez, but there are some things that I still like about Phil Foden. So I would say for the most part, I'm very disappointed with the underlying data for both. Considering they're playing in a Man City attack, and Man City have struggled in general this season, maybe that's why. I'm not blown away by either, but output-wise, they're both averaging roughly the same points. You can see here, 4.39 points for Alvarez, 4.69 for Foden. Of course, midfielders will always score more points because they get an extra point for a goal and they get an extra point for a clean sheet. So the great thing about Foden is he has to do less to get the same amount of points as Alvarez, and forwards have to do a lot more to get those monster hauls, and that is shown here with their average FPL points. Expected FPL points, though, Alvarez is actually underperforming his data by 1 point per 90, whereas Phil Foden is actually overperforming his expected data by around sort of 0.6, 0.7 points per 90. So definitely, if one is going to improve soon, you would hope that is probably Julian Alvarez. When we look at their actual expected goal involvement, they have very similar non-penalty expected goals. It's 0.21 for Julian Alvarez, and actually just slightly higher for Phil Foden. So from open play goal threat, I would say there is not a lot to separate the two of them. They both have average, if not slightly poor, open play goal threat. That's not particularly impressive. If we're sort of explaining what that means, it means that every 5 games, they will accumulate 1 expected goal. So you are expecting in a 10-game period, if they perform according to their stats without penalties, they will get roughly 2 goals in 10 games. And that's kind of what we've seen with Alvarez. Alvarez has 1 goal from open play in the last 10 games. So that's not massively out of line with what his data's suggesting. Of course, great now that Alvarez does have penalties in the absence of Haaland, but that will only last so long. Where Alvarez comes out massively on top in comparison to Foden is the expected assists. He is a much more creative asset than Foden. You can see here almost 3 times the creativity of Foden. 0.35 expected assists for Alvarez versus 0.12 for Foden. This makes Alvarez, in my opinion, a great option because he's got pens, okay average open play goal threat, but great creativity. He's got so many routes to points. Corners, free kicks, penalties, open play. Like, there are so many ways that Julian Alvarez can get you points. And what this sadly means for me, Foden-wise, is that data is really poor. And I want to bring Foden in, and I may still well do so. We'll discuss that in my team part at the end. But 0.34 non-penalty expected goal involvement is rubbish. That is really rubbish for Phil Foden. And you can say, yeah, but look at the last 3 game weeks. He's actually not. It doesn't matter what sample. By the way, I should have mentioned this at the start. These are stats from the last 8 game weeks. So the last 7 games for Alvarez and Foden. I just wanted to look a little bit more short term, not look across the whole season. But across the whole season, it's roughly the same. And if you change the sample size to the last 2 or 3 weeks, it massively boosts Alvarez because he's been very good. He had a very good game, I suppose, against Everton. But for Phil Foden, it's roughly the same again. Like, he's just not at any point this season shown from a data perspective that he is getting tons of chances to score goals and to create too. So it's a little bit disappointing. It puts me off slightly, but historically, Foden has had really strong data. And I think he is a talented enough footballer to turn it on at any given moment. And I think with the fixtures that they've got, he's the kind of player where I'm okay slightly overlooking data on this occasion. Big chance involvement-wise, once again, Alvarez comes out on top at 1.22 big chance involvement per 90. So over a big chance involvement in some regard per 90. And Foden sat just below that at 0.75. So to put that all together, Alvarez is the best option from these two, in my opinion, for a few different reasons. The first is his data is just better from open play, right? He's got better creativity, similar similar expected goals, but of course he has the addition of penalties. He takes more corners than Foden, and he also takes more free kicks too. So Alvarez has more routes to points, has penalties, which is a massive addition. And on top of that, he has better data too, especially when we look at creativity. And I think over the short term, they are just as nailed as each other. So I think if you're looking across a maybe 3 game week spell, I would be very surprised, in my opinion anyway, if come the Burnley game, both KDB and Haaland are definitely fit to start and they both go straight back into the starting 11. You might get one, but in that case, I still think there's a good chance Alvarez starts. So if we're looking a lot across the next 3, I think both Alvarez and Foden start all 3. And therefore, I would be happy taking a short-term punt on Alvarez. But if you are looking to hold this player beyond that, Foden may be the safer one. And of course, like I said, Foden does get the extra point for a goal. He does get the extra point for a clean sheet. And he, in and of himself, is a fantastic FPL option. We saw his performance in Game Week 19. So I don't want this to put you off Foden, but I can't sit here and tell you that Foden has got good data. I could try and change the sample size all I want. At no point this season has Foden really shown that he's got that ability to deliver you lots and lots of FPL points, whereas Alvarez kind of has. His data against Everton was unbelievable. He was sat at a 1.7 expected goal involvement. Even if you remove the penalty, it was almost 1 expected goal involvement. So I definitely think Alvarez has the highest ceiling. I think he has the most routes to points, and I think he's the better option at the moment. But if you can't move to Alvarez, Foden in and of himself is a great option. I am still tempted to bring him in, and I think with the fixtures that they've got, he still could potentially deliver. That is a very long 12.5-minute section on the Manchester City players, but do let me know down below, are you considering Alvarez, are you considering Foden, or are you just looking to avoid both? So I would argue that this is potentially the most difficult captaincy decision of the season in Game Week 20 because I do not think there is a massive standout option. Not that I don't think there are good options, but there just isn't that one or even 2 players that you say they really stand out ahead of the rest. I think I would argue there are 8 or 9 even options that you could justify captaining in Game Week 20. So who do we captain? I'm finding this very difficult. I almost didn't do this section of the video because I just don't know myself, but I can discuss a few of them. I'm going to start with Solanke. He's a captaincy option, and I can't believe I'm seeing people bench him. I would start him ahead of a lot of players in our teams. I would start him ahead of Palmer. I would arguably even start him ahead of Saka. I would arguably start him ahead of some of the players on this list, such as maybe even a Watkins or a Son, because his data has been better. Bournemouth's data has been better. He is on penalties, and he is a 90-minute man. And someone like a Watkins, well, he's not on penalties. His data hasn't been as good as Solanke's. Aston Villa have been faltering a little bit recently, so I mean, is Solanke a much worse option than Watkins? No. Is he a potentially better option? Maybe. And the Spurs' defence have been shocking, right? They really haven't been performing. And I know Burnley at home is also a good fixture, but I guess just around Solanke, like, I don't own him. I'm terrified of him every week. Maybe it's easy for me to sit here and say I would be tempted to captain, and I definitely wouldn't bench him, but I just don't get it. He's been brilliant. Like, if I owned him, he would definitely be in my starting 11. I do just question, though, like, we saw recently he got a hat-trick. I don't know if he has that high of a ceiling on a consistent basis. And as I have said before, forwards have to do a hell of a lot to get points. So maybe you just start Solanke, but he's not maybe the captaincy option for you, especially because Spurs can dominate games. Yes, they do concede chances. Yes, Brighton put 4 goals past them. But if they hold the ball enough, we've seen them in the past, they can keep clean sheets because they just are relentless in their attack. So maybe Spurs away isn't the perfect fixture, but I certainly wouldn't be benching Solanke. Watkins is fine as a captaincy option, but I have the same issue with Watkins every time we discuss captaining him. He's not on penalties. And I know that is one very small part of what makes a player, but normally when we see these big hauls from players, there's a penalty involved. We saw it with Solanke recently. Alvarez obviously got an 8-pointer just due to a penalty. And when they don't have that penalty, it feels like a blank is even more possible. And again, we've seen that with Watkins recently. He's blanked quite a few game weeks because he doesn't have the addition of penalties. He doesn't take set pieces. There aren't many routes to points for Watkins. He has one route, maybe 2, which is score goals and then the odd assist in there too. So that's always my concern with Watkins. I'll just add to that Villa have been struggling a bit recently. And maybe we're seeing similar with Villa, what we saw with Brighton and Newcastle. Maybe the European competition, which is quite new for them, is taking its toll on the players. Watkins didn't get many/any chances against Manchester United. Even when Aston Villa looked really good in that first half, I wasn't impressed with Watkins. But I would sit here and probably say that on paper, Watkins has the best fixture of the bunch. I don't think there is a single captaincy option with a better fixture than Ollie Watkins. So maybe that overrides the lack of penalties and the fact that Villa have been faltering slightly recently. So for me, he would have to have a significantly better fixture than some of the other players, such as in Game Week 18 when he had Sheffield United at home, for me to consider captaining him. Maybe once Son and Salah go off to their tournaments, if Haaland isn't available, maybe I'll consider Watkins captain then. But for now, sadly, I just don't think I can give him the armband. We've then got 3 options that I am considering giving the armband myself, which is Salah, Alvarez, and Son. Salah is just so consistent, and it just feels so safe. Now, you get that feeling of safety. You feel like you've been wrapped up in a blanket and tucked into bed when you captain Salah. It just feels nice because, number one, he's very highly owned. So you have that safety of you're not going against who will probably be, and he probably will again this week, be the most captain player. You know that he very, very rarely blanks. You know he's a 90-minute man. You know he's on penalties. You know how good Liverpool are at home at Anfield. And to be honest, Newcastle haven't been good recently, especially away from home. They have struggled massively. My only concern with Salah this week, because I've just listed so many positives, and you don't need me to list the positives of captaining him. My only slight concern is that Newcastle just randomly turn it on. When you think they are down and out and they have been performing really poorly, we've seen it on so many occasions, even last season at points, they just have a defensive masterclass because they are still the same team. Especially if Joelinton's back, especially if they have their starting back 4. I know they don't have Pope, and I think Pope is a massive loss, but they are still largely the same team, and they still have the same structure integrated in them by Eddie Howe. So I don't think that suddenly Newcastle are a bad defence. And whilst they've always been better at home, they've shown some brilliant defensive performances away from home too. So I always feel slightly uneasy captaining a player against Newcastle because you just never know what week they'll just decide to turn it back on. And maybe that's a little bit of narrative bias, and maybe I should just look at the stats and say Salah is great at Anfield. Newcastle are not good defensively away from home. They're struggling at the moment. Salah is the obvious captain. And to be honest, I would argue he maybe is the best captain. I would have him in there in the top 2 captaincy options this week. But for me, the player that I currently have the armband on, and I am going back and forth, don't worry, is Alvarez. And I know in my team selection video, I said I don't think Alvarez is a great captaincy option. I think the reason for that is I'm a little bit biased because I've owned him for a while and he's been very frustrating to own. And even in game week 19, he was once again very frustrating to own. He had quite a few chances. He created chances too, and he came away with an 8-pointer. And I've just got this thing in my head that he's a frustrating player and he'll frustrate you again and he'll blank again. But when I sit there objectively, because I was discussing this with someone that isn't an Alvarez owner, and when I was saying the things out loud, I was like, he's not only a good option, he's a good captaincy option, good data, probably likely to play 90 minutes on pretty much all corners, a lot of free kicks and penalties against Sheffield United at home. And yes, there's been an improvement for Sheffield United under Wilder, but I think we'd all be pretty shocked if City don't put at least 2, probably 3 or 4 goals past Sheffield United. And they kind of need a big performance. They haven't had one for a while now in the Premier League. It just feels like a very good fixture. And the reasons that I've just said, he's just got so many routes to points. I would argue, outside of Mbermo, who has the similar routes to points, Alvarez has the most routes to points in the Premier League at the moment. Because it's very rare that you get a player that is not only on pens, but also on set pieces as well. And is also carrying some decent open play goal threat. Because maybe you have like a Douglas Luiz who's on pens and corners and some free kicks, but doesn't have the same open play threat from whether that be creativity or goal threat. Alvarez kind of has all of it. And so when I'm looking at captaining a player and I have a player that can fall back on corners, they can fall back on free kicks, they can fall back on penalties, and they can also fall back on just potential open play returns. And when I say fall back, I mean Alvarez could have an absolute stinker against Sheffield United, but he could get a penalty. He could get an assist from a corner. And I like that. I don't want... Ollie Watkins, as an example, he has to have a good performance and finish well from open play to get any returns. And therefore, I just feel like Alvarez has more chance of not blanking for me. And so at the moment, he does have the armband, but I could definitely see myself changing that. I know a lot of people will be looking at Foden as well. I've just discussed Foden in detail. The stats aren't really there for me. And in comparison to Alvarez, he doesn't have the pens. And he does take the odd corner and free kick, but generally he's not on set pieces either. So he's a similar player to like a Watkins, where he doesn't have that many routes to points. Especially with the fact that also... he's not really demonstrated much creativity. So I just don't think Foden for me is a captaincy option, although I do still like him as a transfer in. I'll just very briefly discuss Son. Son is great. Son is on pens. He also does take the odd free kick, but he's just such a clinical player that if he gets a chance, you fancy him to take it. And Bournemouth at home, on paper, may have looked like a good fixture previously, but just now it's not. Over the last 6 weeks, they are the second best defence in the league for expected goals conceded. They continue to perform very well. In that time, they've only conceded more than 1 XG on 1 occasion. So, like, it's not a good fixture anymore. I don't think I sit here and say that I want to captain Son against Bournemouth or anyone against Bournemouth, really. And so for those reasons, on top of the fact that I don't think he is as great of an option when he's pushed out to the left, I think Richarlison will get most of the big chances for Spurs through the middle. I just don't fancy myself a captaincy punt on Heung-min Son. I could see Son and Spurs scoring, but it just doesn't feel like the best fixture to attack for me. And it doesn't feel like the right time to bet on Spurs going out and getting tons of goals. So if I was to summarise my feeling at the moment, and believe me, this is changing hour to hour, I would say, and this is all opinion-based, Alvarez, Salah, Son, Solanke, Watkins. In that order for me. I wouldn't put Foden in that top 5. All of the other players that you might be considering, they might be decent options, but for me, they're not in the top 5. I think if you've got Alvarez, I'd be very tempted. If you don't, maybe just default to Salah, and you could just default to Salah anyway. I think for me, I've narrowed it down to either Alvarez or Salah, and I'll have that decision to make before the deadline. Let's take a look at my team for the final section and look at my current transfer plans. So guys, in this final section, I thought I'd just discuss where I'm at with my team and my transfer plans for 20, and then also moving into 21 when we obviously lose Son, Salah, and all of the players that go off to AFCON and the Asian Cup. So, as you can see, I've plugged in my 2 planned transfers at the moment, and I did say I plan on using 2 free transfers in Game Week 20, and I think I will, especially given the news. As you can see, if I just scroll down to my bench, Pau Torres, unfortunately, as I said in the press conference section, looks like he won't be fully fit for Game Week 20. I don't really want to play Kieran Trippier, who I did have in there, or Taylor, so I want to make a transfer in the defence, and I've decided... Well, I've thought about this actually in a bit of detail. I think I've just been really stubborn with Trent. I didn't bring in Trent early. I had Trippier in my team, and I just thought, I fancy going head-to-head with Trent. I think Trippier can match him. I was wrong about that. And then I've been sat there with Trippier in my team. Trent keeps returning, and I've thought, well, Trent's too expensive now. He's got difficult fixtures coming up. I'm not going to do it. But it's stubbornness, and it's because other people own him. I'm trying to find different ways to get ahead. But if I'm looking at this objectively, Trent is just so good. Like, it does not matter about the fixtures. And to be honest, some of these fixtures aren't even that bad, given how some of the teams are performing. So I want Trent in. I think I do. And I think given that I'm going to sell Trippier, it probably does make sense, whilst I have the money available, to just go for Trent. So currently the plan is Trippier to Trent with one transfer. And then the second one is Martinelli to Foden. But the stats are putting me off Foden a bit. And I do think, should I just move to Bowen? Is Bowen the safer bet? It's not even a safe bet. He's very, very good. He's returning. And he feels like a better long-term hold. He'll cause me less issues in the future. I'll probably at some point need to take Foden out. He's not going to last forever in my team. And the stats are much better for Bowen. So does it make more sense to just go for Bowen and Trent? I'm not sure on that one yet. But let's say, at the time of me recording, I'm feeling fairly sure that it will be Trent and one of those two coming in to my team. And that will leave the team looking like this. I have 0.1 in the bank. I'll probably have to make the transfers tonight on Friday night. So you'll see the transfers that I've made going into the Saturday deadline stream. That's the current plan. I would love to know, firstly, what do you think about that? If we then just skip ahead, by the way, I'm using Fantasy Football Hub. I think this is the final day for their 30% off. There'll be a link in the description. And, sorry, for their 30-day free trial. 30% off, I think, lasts a little bit longer. But the 30-day free trial plus 30% ends either today or tomorrow. So do check out that deal whilst you can. Going into GameWeek 21, bit of a disaster, right? Because obviously Son and Salah go away. And if I do make those two transfers, I won't have 2 free transfers going into 21. I'm only going to have the one. Now, that probably isn't an issue if, and I think he will be, Pau Torres is available then. Because I think if Pau Torres is available, what I can do, I'll bring in Darwin for one. So I can bring in Darwin for Salah. And I can even bring in Pau Torres for Son. I obviously wouldn't just not make a transfer and bench both. But if I were in the position where I had so many other issues to sort and it was just becoming tricky, I have a decent 4-3-3 here. I wouldn't captain Alvarez, by the way. By the way, God knows who we captain in Game Week 21. I'll probably captain Saka, I guess. Let's just put the armband on Saka for now. But again, I wouldn't just bench Son and Salah. But if I did, the team is in a decent 4-3-3. And I've even got on the bench, if I just scroll down, Charlie Taylor against Luton at home. So I have the cover to deal with the fact that I'll only have one free transfer. I think my plan at first, if Haaland's back, it will be to take a -4 hit, to probably remove Salah and one of Darwin or Alvarez, bring Haaland back in, and I would captain Haaland if he's available for 21. But I've got a feeling he either won't be available for 21 or he'll be such a doubt that we won't want to at least captain him, in which case I'll probably wait for 22. So what it will probably be is something along the lines of Son to Bowen. And then I would bring, let me make that transfer. I would make that transfer and I would probably bring Bowen in for probably Pau, and it would look something like that. And I'd be back in a 3-4-3, and I would either leave Salah in there permanently, or I would just wait until Haaland's back to remove Salah. So I'm not going to really go beyond that, because so many things could change. It really does depend on the Haaland update. But I just wanted to show you that at the moment, my current plan is Trent and Foden in. I feel like it's got good upside. I know it leaves me with one free transfer and nothing in the bank, but I just kind of want to be a bit aggressive with it. And then in 21, I'll sell at least one of Salah or Son, and probably I'm looking at bringing in Foden. Let me know down below in the comments what you think of my plans, and let me know what your plans are too. That was a very, very long video, but hopefully you did enjoy it. And if you did enjoy today's video, please do smash that like button and make sure to subscribe as well. I'm trying to hit 110,000 subscribers before the end of the year. We don't have long now. I don't think I'll hit it, but I would really, really appreciate the support. Until next time, which will be the deadline stream tomorrow morning, thank you very much for watching. Cheers. Bye-bye.